John from Ripewave Audio for a very exciting video today. We're going to unbox and set up the brand new Marantz AV20 AV processor. This sells for $6,000. We got ours in here now. We're going to see if eventually in this series, if this is better than the RMC1 AV processor that we have in house. Of course, we have our Cinema 50 as well, which was the first product that Marantz had out in the Cinema series with the full 8K across the board for all the inputs. And we got ours when it first got released. We did videos on that initially to compare it against the RMC1. The RMC1, of course, won from a sound quality point of view. Of course, the Cinema 50 is more feature rich. And as other products came out in the cinema range, we brought in the Cinema 40 and then the Cinema 30. And we thought the Cinema 30 was getting close, almost sounded as good as the RMC1. Now with the AV20, which is the next model jump up from the Cinema 30, but as a processor separate and not a receiver, we have amplifiers for all our speakers. We do not need the amplifiers built into the receivers for our setup. I think a lot of you are trying to make that decision. Do I move off of a receiver, go to a processor separate? Is it worthwhile to do that jump? And I think this video might help you because this is the next model up. Of course, you pay more for it. The Cinema 30 is about a $4,500 unit versus this is a $6,000 unit. Before I open this up, I do want to make a note that we are going to be testing it out also with a new splitter from Ouray. We have been using their products for some time. We did a video on the unit that we have been using, which is their UHDS 104. So that takes a signal in and splits it 4 ways into 4K video. And this has been great. We can have up to 4 receivers or processors in at a time when we do our comparisons, and we can send the same signal to all the units simultaneously from our UHD Blu-ray player, which is a Sony player, or Apple TV, or any other source we want to. We have 2 of those Ourays in place today that do the 4K video, and we've been using that, and then we can get more apples to apples comparison with that same signal, not necessarily just for the video capability, but from an audio perspective. And we have our Duke Audio ABC switchers, and we can quickly switch any one of up to 16 channels of audio instantaneously to compare between 3 different models of AV receivers and processors and see which one sounds better. And if they're receiving the exact same source at the same time, that's going to make that comparison a lot more fair. So now with the Ouray BK104, we now jump up to an 8K model. And at the time when we originally did our video in April of 2023, where we started using the Ouray splitters, they only had, I believe, a 2x1 8K splitter. And I think it was a little bit more money. Now you can get the 1x4 splitter for $69.99 on Amazon. Of course, you can get it from other places as well. And the original units, I have 2 of them. The 4K units are $33.99 on Amazon today. So we will be using these. We'll probably do a separate video on the splitters and how we do our test setup later on. But in the meantime, we do have a Marantz AV20 to open up and take a look at. You might have seen our video from a couple weeks ago. We did a full run through on the AV20. I invite you to go back and review that video. If you haven't seen it, it gives you all the details and the comparison against other Marantz models and select Denon models like their flagship receivers, the A1H and the A10H, and where it fits into the model lines. Of course, that AVR, which lines up with the Cinema 30, the AVR 6800H, We also did a review on, we've done a lot of reviews on Denon and Marantz products. I'll put the slides up here. You can see all the different videos that we've done over the years and brought them in-house. So we really have a good sense of what you get when you jump up in price. And I know that Marantz lines, you traditionally jumped up about $1,000 with each model, moving from the Cinema 50 to the Cinema 40 to the Cinema 30. But now to go to an AV20, and you're losing all those channels of amplification that are built in, is going to cost you $1,500 more, at least in the United States. So let's begin to open this up. I purchased this unit from Crutchfield. I like working with them. They have a return policy that's easy. 60 days to listen to it in your own house. And when you do purchase it, you do have some purchasing options. You can, of course, pay for it all at once. You could spread it out over 3 payments. At, in this case, $6,000 unit, about $2,000 a payment. If you have tax to pay for, then they'll build that into, I think, the first payment. But otherwise, and it's going to be $2,000 for the second and third payments on this particular unit. They double box this. They don't charge for shipping. They're easy to work with. They have advice if you have questions on what the unit is, help you work through a lot of the decisions, or if you're going one model to another. And their website, I use that for reference. They do a very good job at presenting all the data. And I often refer to that as much as I do the manufacturer's own websites. And sometimes they're a little clearer. Now, I've just given them a good plug, and I don't even have any affiliation with them, but it just speaks to the fact that I like working with Crutchfield over some of the other retailers that I've dealt with. So as I said, this is double box. So the first box is what Crutchfield does. The second box is how Marantz provides it. So let's get this out of the second box. Outer box is up, and I'm going to flip this back up correctly. Some retailers will ship it to you in the Marantz box, but I do like the double box because it keeps this clean. And if you ever have to ship it back, they always want it to come back in the original box because it protects the unit in a good way. The foam and everything is designed so this will usually make it back to wherever you're sending it to in a very safe way. So you might send it back for a repair, or if you decide that this isn't the right model for you, then it ensures it gets back to whatever retailer you got in a good way. So we're not expecting a lot of surprises in the box. We've had the Cinema 50, the 40, the 30, and we expect some of the accessories to be exactly the same. And we already know the remotes are very similar, although we did notice with the Cinema 30, the remote was a little better than the Cinema 40 and how it weighs. So you get your IEC power cord, you get your Odyssey microphone, which at this point we probably don't do a lot of because we do prefer the direct calibration. And even if we were doing the Odyssey Mult EQ EX upgraded calibration, we would be using probably a different microphone, a calibrated microphone. So you get your accessories box, you do get the remote, and this is that heavier remote over what you get on a Cinema 50 and other lower models. So we do like that feel. It does got a more professional feel on the remote over the lower models, even though it looks exactly the same. Does have the backlight button on it. We'll put the batteries in and we'll test it out. You do have a quick start guide. This is not a manual. Manuals are available online. They give you Unlocking the Magic of HEOS, which I'm not a big fan of built-in streaming capabilities, but they do have their HEOS ecosystem, and it could have some value if you have some HEOS enabled equipment in your room beyond the streaming capabilities. There's also the wireless antennas. There's two of them. I'll set that back in the box for now. You remove a layer of foam, and then there's some other items in the accessories box, like your antennas and your labeling. We use our own labels and our own color scheme. When you start getting beyond the ear level basic speakers, the color coding that Marantz and Denon uses essentially gives you just the same colors for every other immersive channel. So I find that their color scheme is not for me. So I set that aside. And they give you a little cardboard microphone holder to use with their microphone for Odyssey. They call it well, I don't know if they call it, but the Marantz Denon community calls it the rocket ship. I don't know if that's an official name or not. So we're going to set this accessories box aside at this point and continue to unbox. This is another piece of foam that's keeping this together. And this unit is, surprisingly, with no amplifiers built into this, weighs more than my Cinema 50 with amplification in it. It weighs almost as much as the Cinema 40, but then you get into a Cinema 30, that indeed weighs more than this AV20. Now this ships very similarly as we've seen with other Marantz products. Has a more elegant shipping than a Denon product. It has this foam-like covering with the Marantz sticker on it. As I've done before, I always try to take this apart carefully, so if I ever have to wrap it up again. Now with the Cinema 30, you have a choice of finishes on the front. It can be this black, or it can be their silver color. I have not heard or seen that the AV20 is available in the silver finish. At least in North America, this is the finish that we do have available to us. I've repositioned the camera and everything so you could see this better with this out of the box here. I haven't powered it on yet. I want to talk about a few things about this unit. One is, first, why would you select the AV20, let's say, versus the AV10 or some other model? Well, first, I always think that people should start with their speaker counts. What layouts do you have to support or plan to support in the future? This AV20 processor can handle a 7.4.6 or a 9.4.4 configuration. What does that mean? 7 ear level speakers without front wides and 3 rows of heights and 4 subwoofers, or 9 ear level speakers, which includes front wide speakers and only 2 rows of heights, but still 4 subwoofers. The subwoofer count is not dependent on how you configure the system. They'll always have those 4 subwoofers outputs available to you. As an AV processor, none of these channels are amplified inside of the unit. You do have to use external amplifiers for every channel. So you have to keep that in mind. You have to have that investment ready to go. Now, Marantz has their AMP 20 and AMP 10 to complement these units, but you can use any amplifier. One of the main reasons you might want the AMP 20 or the AMP 10 is just to cosmetically match these. What I understand, they're pretty well designed in themselves. We have mostly Emotiva amplifiers, differential reference throughout, except for our height channels, which are being powered by a pretty old Sony 5-channel amplifier with 1 channel spare on that. And of course, the AV20 is fairly feature rich. This gives you Dolby Atmos, DTS:X, but also DTS:X Pro. When you went to the Cinema 30, that was the first model with the Pro, and now it carries forward with the AV20. Of course, the AV10 as well has that Pro capability, but Ouray 3D with a up to 13.1 configuration Ouray 3D on this unit. So yes, it will be able to do 14 channels of processing coming into the unit, and then of course independent subwoofer controls to let you select this. So some of you may have already been in a processor separate, moving from one of the older Marantz products. So if we go back and look at the prior generation, you might be coming from an AV8805A, which is the closest match in the prior generation to this product. That only had 15 channels of processing, but the 2 that it's missing versus the 17 total on this is those additional channels of independent subwoofer. So the older generation going from 2 independent subwoofers to 4 independent subwoofers on this. That was a $5,500 unit, still available today. This one you pay $500 more for today for $6,000, but it's 4 years newer, has the newer style, has those extra subwoofer, has Dirac Live support, which they didn't have in the prior generation, Dirac Live bass control, and as we're told now, Dirac Active Room Treatment, or ART, is coming in the future to all their newer generation products that support for external subwoofers. So that will be interesting. Of course, there's an upcharge option cost that you pay Dirac to get any of those Dirac features. We'll look at this again when we power this up, but this unit does have a door that opens up in the front and has an extra LCD display, which we don't have in the lower models like our Cinema 50. And I'll just open it up here unpowered so you can see quickly what it looks like powered off. I'm going to spin this around, but before I do, I'll just show you that indeed the Odyssey microphone that comes with this is no surprise. It looks like the Eiffel Tower looking microphone that Odyssey has been shipping with Marantz and Denon products for years. I have a lot of these, or a few of them. So I'll put this one back. I won't need to use it, but I have seen cases where calibration microphones start to fail, and it's good to hang on to them if that's the case. We've already done a lot of videos where we've done comparison between Odyssey, Dirac Live, Odyssey, Mult EQ, EX, and so forth. So we may not go into those in detail, but if they do come out with Dirac Art support, that's something that we would definitely want to try out. Let's flip this thing around. And you can see on the back here, it's got that copper color. They put extra copper shielding on the models Cinema 30 on up. When we look inside these, the interior images, the AV20 and the AV10 have even more of that copper plating inside versus Cinema 30. You see it mostly on this exterior, not as much on the inside. So they do take things up a level. Probably accounts for why this thing gets to be heavier. There's a toroidal power supply built into this unit. It's not going to be as large as what you have in a receiver, but you don't have to power internal amplifiers. But they've stuck toroidal power supplies versus the E-core that you would see in a Denon product. When we look on the back here, we do see all our HDMI inputs. There's quite a few in here. There's 3 outputs on here. 2 are 8K on the outputs. All the inputs are 8K on this unit. So all 7 are 8K capable, or more importantly, HDMI 2.1 capable. So even if you're not using 8K sources, it will handle 4K better because of the other HDMI 2.1 capabilities. But keep in mind that all Denon and Marantz products from this generation, are using a Nuvoton chip that has an issue with QMS, quick media switching. And so you're not seeing Denon Marantz claiming that any longer, because that chip manufacturer has come forward and saying they have that issue. So don't expect that to work. The only product I know that's using a Nuvoton chip that resolves that, Nuvoton just released a new chip. It's going to be in, or is in, the recently released new Plus series from Emotiva, which we also hope to get in and compare. And they're claiming some really good switching capabilities, stability, which is a huge upgrade from prior Emotiva, but they're saying is even better than a lot of the competition. Be nice to head that. You can see on the back here that we do have some legacy support from composite component video that you didn't see in the AV10 on that, because it has a lot more outputs. But you can see on the bottom across, those are all XLR balanced connections. Now, this isn't a fully differential, fully balanced unit. Neither is the AV10. But the last stage, they do have the balanced outputs. This is the common way to do balanced on a processor and receiver. Emotiva is unique. They have differential reference across all 16 of their channels. But we'll see if that makes a difference when we do the comparison. What we do like on this is it has a balanced input as well. And we didn't see that on the receiver models from Marantz. So very nice to see. It does have unbalanced connections if you don't have balanced, which you don't see on an Emotiva. You'd have to use a converting cable to accommodate that. So that's what I wanted to talk about this. Now, while we do like the copper shielding, we noted when we were reviewing the Cinema 30 that also has this copper back. It's harder to read the labels because of that copper shielding. Want to show off the fact that they're using copper shielding, still use some lettering, different silkscreen on there that make the labels read easier. That's my one complaint there. When you compare this against like an 8805, I think the layout too of having the pre-outs that are unbalanced right above the balance connections are much more logical, where the older unit, it was separated off into its own section. So what we should do at this point is we can get this up into our rack where we have a set of testing cables which give it inputs using the Ouray splitters, which will bring in our UHD player, and it'll bring in our Apple TV. And what else we want to bring in, maybe we want to bring in our PlayStation. And we'll have that working. We'll probably bring the PlayStation, our PS5 in through the new 8K splitter, and then we'll have the Apple TV and the UHD player coming into our 4K Ouray units. Nice to have that in our test setup. So let's just move that over into the rack now, and we'll reposition the camera one more time. Before we move this up into our rack setup here, we want to make sure it fits. The AV20 is a little taller than the Cinema 50. So if we go by the Cinema 50 is 6.5 inches high, 165 millimeters. And the AV20 is an inch taller, 7.5 inches, 189 millimeters. There's also a depth increase. So the Cinema 50 was 15.4, 392 millimeters, and this AV20, 18 inches and 457 millimeters. So we'll measure this. So we're trying to find out, will it fit a 7.5 inch height? So I have a little ruler, and 7.5 comes to here. So I'm going to have to remove this top shelf. Of course, I have to remove my Fuzzy Audio preamp DAC that we did a review a few weeks back. Actually, kind of like that unit for streaming capabilities through USB from our laptop. That works well. Of course, what we have built into our RMC1 works equally as well. But okay. We're going to have to remove that top rack, but let's see the depth. The depth is going to be 18 inches, 457 millimeters. That's 12 and 6, that's 18. So we're going to fit just fit in this rack with the AV20. It appears we would not fit the AV10, which is bigger. Gosh, that's just short of 20 inches. We'd need a couple more inches to fit an AV20 into this rack. This is pretty standard depth, so I think if you have a standard depth cabinet, rack, etc., you're going to fit an AV20. Be really careful if you're trying to bring in an AV10. It may not fit in the equipment that you have. Now, this being, if we remove this top shelf, we do get a little extra room, and we probably would fit the AV20 with the top shelf removed. So let's do that now and get rid of the Aussie. All the op amps we were rolling, and take this off. These are just friction fit, and this VTI rack, we really like the VTI rack because it's ultra configurable for what we do here at Ripewave Audio. I put this in back facing, so we'll be able to put the connectors on, and then we'll just turn it around. Another reason why I like this, because it's so open, this rack system, that I don't have to go around the back and access this, or really sneak my head in with a flashlight and feel my way to the connectors. Now, the way we've got this set up, an XLR balanced snake back to our ABC switcher. There's 8 connectors here. They're color-coded. I have a scheme for that we use here at Ripewave Audio. We have these adapters that go XLR to RCA unbalanced. We use these if the component we have doesn't have balanced connections. But in this case, we will have those completely removed. And we have 2 of these snakes here. 16 channel total capacity that we have with the current setup. This gives us the right channels. This is our left channels. So we're going to start with, it doesn't really matter, we could start with the right hand channel. And we have this color coded because each snake is its own thing. This can be all my right channel. And so I'm making red be my color for front. So I'll put this to front right. And then green is my center channel. We'll only have one of those, only on the right snake. And then we have our surrounds. We'll plug that in here. So the way this is laid out here, it's right, left, center, right, left, etc. So we're going to put this in the right hand side. All these are going into the right. Remember, we got surround back. That's our brown color. Then we have our, and I'll keep turning this as we get closer here because the cable isn't long enough to do that. I'll have to lighten up the slack on the other side. But we'll use yellow for the height 1. Orange for height 2. We've got gray for front wide. Now, we don't have a height 3, so we're skipping that one. And we're going to go right over to front wide. And I'm going to turn this a little bit more. Gray for front wide. And then this is our subwoofer. We're going to put this as subwoofer 1. There's subwoofer 2, 3, and 4. We're not going to use 3 and 4. So we've got the other subwoofer on the other snake. And so for this, now we've got to go the same colors in the same order, but this time for the left channel. Left red on front, then surround, which is blue, left, surround back, which is brown. There's other color coding schemes. This is our own Ripewave scheme that we used, so it matches the cables that we buy. There are some international standards out there. So yellow is going to be height 1, left. Orange is going to be height 2 left, and then we've got our front wide left, and then we're going to put in our second subwoofer, and then we don't have a second center channel, so we're going to leave that dangling. And we're ready to go on all our pre-outs. Had we only had unbalanced amplifiers, we would have used this row. I will point out the connectors on the back of this are pretty robust for the RCA. Not as the deep ones like you have on the RMC one, but more than what we see on a normal piece of equipment. Notice I'm leaving the power connector off, but at this phase, I am going to bring in the HDMI, which is going to be our main sources here. And so what we've got here, the Apple TV, and we can see here they have suggested labels. I recommend using their suggestions as much as you can, because if you go to their remote, the remote will have a button that says cable TV, will say media streamer, and you want to match as much as possible so you're not have to rethink in your mind what button you're going to be using on the remote. So Apple TV, so this first one says cable satellite. I don't have that wired back to here. But this says media player is the next one, which I say is the best choice here for Apple TV. Let's put that one in there. And then the other one I've got here is ultra high definition. Blu-ray player, so this is Blu-ray is the next one, so I'll put it in the Blu-ray slot. Game, we are going to set up another cable for the game. We're going to use the Ouray 8K splitter and go to the PlayStation so we can get that 8K source there as well. And then that will leave our output here. And so this says output 3 because this is the third test unit. We can do here up to 3 ABC with our Duke Audio switcher. So this is the third output. There's 3 outputs on the back of the AV20. The first one is a 4K output. That's for zone 2. So we're going to go to this one. It says TV1. That's where we want it. That can be 8K TV plugged in there. We don't have any composite component. We'll leave those out. The other things that we could put in here are triggers. Right now, all our amplifiers, our subwoofers, are triggered by our RMC1. We could plug those in. The RMC1 has 4, and I'm using all 4, so I'm going to leave it all on the RMC1, but also knowing we could have up to 3 here. Now, if you ran out of trigger outputs, you can also use external devices to split that signal out. Some of the remote controls and all that. Okay, so we've got that. So let's put the Wi-Fi antennas on. If your rack doesn't accommodate them pointing up, you can always point them in another direction. You do have to account for your cables too when you're doing your distances in your rack. So these XLRs stick out further than an RCA connection. So you're going to use up rack space in as far as depth a little bit more when you go balanced. Of course you can do right angles, but then you've got another problem of where is it going to be right angling to. So better with a deeper cabinet as possible. Again, making that AV10 a little harder to use for some. This does have that balanced input we might try later on, which we could bring in our phono player, which we have a external preamp on the phono, and we can wire this a long distance to that because it's balanced. Now that's ready to go except for the power, which we've got this plugged into the power outlet. Notice we always use this last. We wire everything up as much as possible. One thing I noticed with these Marantz and Denon, these are not always got a lot of friction in here, so make sure you push it in as much as you can so it doesn't slip out or wiggle while it's in the cabinet. And I do have that one more wire to put in for the PlayStation, but as I said, it would go here, and we'll get that in a little later. make sure too with your HDMI cables that you're getting the quality of HDMI. I'd say just go 8K capable cables throughout, even if it's a 4K source at this point. Then you know it will work with whatever you're hooking up. And as I put this back, I just gotta make sure that the cables come along with the movement. So I stop at various places to make sure that it's not binding on anything. I will point out here too that the screws are also the copper. If we were to turn the Cinema 50 below for this, these are black. These are solid copper on the AV20. So there's a difference in materials on these units. The other thing I noticed, there's no vents on the processor, but on the receiver we have vents on the side. Of course, there's more heat with the receiver. This unit almost weighs as much as a Cinema 40. It weighs more than the Cinema 50. And of course, the Cinema 30 is definitely weighs more than this AV20. We have this now all ready to power on. So when we power this on, one thing that we'll notice right away is that the Cinema 50 doesn't have any side lightings, but the AV20, as well as the Cinema 30, does have that side lighting as well. And it will default to a kind of light white, but you can change some of those colors as well. And it's going to start up in the Setup Assistant mode. If we pull this door down, you can actually see the additional display lit up here. And then you can see how the Cinema 50 doesn't have that additional display. This is something that we got on the Cinema 30 as well, had that additional display. I do have the batteries now put into the remote. The one for the AV20, I think this is the one, and it is. I could tell right away just by picking it up. I always know because it's heavier than the one that comes from the Cinema. They put a slightly more weight in it, and they also have the extra button for the Zone 3, which you don't have on a Cinema 30. But when you move up the Cinema range, they also add the button for that. They both have the backlight, as you can see here. And you can see on the remote, they use that same terminology: cable TV, media, Blu-ray, game 2, etc. Although it is labeled slightly different on the AV20. There's 2 game inputs versus only 1 on the Cinema 50. We got the 2 auxes, that's the same. There's a phono button, a tuner button, those the same, USB, CD, just in a little different positions. There's an extra button here. So yes, they've got the 2 games there, but then the TV audio is right in the center between the HEOS and the internet audio, which you don't have here. So there's an extra button on the AV20 remote. Other than that, they look pretty much the same. One of the other things I'll bring up on this video is the Marantz products from the Cinema 50, I believe, on up, use a technology they called hyperdynamic amplifier modules, or HDAM. And there's different versions of their HDAM boards and the way they go about it. There's different variations. There's the HDAM2 and there's the HDAM3, etc., that are in these products. So the Cinema 60, 50, 40, and 30 all have the HDAM2 technology design, although the boards are laid out differently depending on channel count and so forth. The receivers, because they have to fit so much within a chassis, have a single board for all channels that they're trying to accommodate with each one of those units. And I will say the Cinema 70 is not using HDAM on those products, on their amplifier boards. What they're doing here is they're using discrete components instead of op amps. And that's really what they've done with Marantz, is because they're using discrete components and versus commercial off-the-shelf op amps, it gives them some ability to tune the sound signature and play with things like and improvements on the slew rate and how fast these are going to work, versus that off-the-shelf chip is going to give you that same characteristic no matter what you put it into. The HDAM boards are using these discrete circuits. And when you move into different products like the AV20 and the AV10, that's using the SA3 design. Now, albeit the AV10 takes it a step further by using higher grade capacitors on the AV10 versus the AV20. And while they're both using thin film resistors in the AV10 and 20, the AV10 uses MILF thin film resistors, which you don't have in the AV20. And the other thing that you get with the AV10 and the AV20 is an individual HDAM board for each channel. Because it is a processor separate, they can do this and still fit it into the chassis. I think this is a good stopping point. We'll get through the other part of the setup. So this is the physical setup. We're ready to go. If we made any errors in connecting either the speakers, the subwoofers to the back of this, or the inputs to the wrong ones, that will come out in the software setup portion of this, which is ready to go now with the software assistant. We're expecting that the software setup will be very similar to what it was with the other Marantz products. I don't think we're going to see a lot of surprises there, although the amp assign section is probably all gone, is what I can anticipate, because this doesn't have any amplifiers built into it. So what did you think of this video? Did you enjoy this? Did this help you in your processor or receiver selection? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. And come back for part 2 when we go into the software setup, and ultimately for that comparison against the RMC1 and the sound quality. How does this measure up? The Cinema 30 came close to beating it. Does this actually beat the RMC1? There's a fighting chance there, so this will be really interesting. So if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, hit that bell notification so you're informed when the next video is posted. And until then, keep evolving your audio experience.